So you guys, how do you decide what you set up and where it goes? Who wants to go ahead?
Well, obviously, what I set up is like a lot of stuff that people use a lot, so that's going to be obviously in my inventory right away. And yeah, I have my own, like you said, I have my own really personal way to do it, a way that I've memorized, so that I can just like, I don't really even have to look that much. I can just kind of reach down and grab it, and I know what I'm picking up. But yeah,
That's great, though. You're going to kind of want to be selective of what you're bringing out based on who's here. If you're noticing that you're 30 minutes into the event and they're drinking all Coors Light, you might want to bring another tote of it out. If you notice that they have hosted beer and wine, what should we have more of? Beer and wine, because those things are paid for, so people are going to want the free product a little bit more. Always looking to see if we have a keg in our details for the bar notes. We're going to just kind of look through our bar opening list. If you guys don't know this is here, this is on your binder. I'd like for you to be using this as a guideline for what you're setting up. So the very first thing here is understanding your specific details for the night. In all of our event notes, there's a section specifically to the bar, and it talks about what is happening. Whether it's a cash bar means the guests are paying for their own drinks. If it's a host bar, meaning somebody has paid for those drinks for the guests. Different scenarios, we could have drink tickets, we could have a certain dollar amount paid for, we could have a certain time frame paid for, we could have beer and wine only, we could have no shots allowed to be served that night. All of those details are very important for you guys to pay attention to, because nothing frustrates a family more than they gave me the instructions and we didn't pass that along correctly to the bar. So first things first, you read through your notes, and if you have questions, you ask your manager. If you still don't feel clear on them, you guys call me and we talk about it more in depth. Hopefully I try to, don't take this wrong, I don't try to dumb it down because we're dumb. I try to dumb it down so anybody could read it and understand what it's trying to be said. So it might be very elaborately worded, but it's going to hopefully come across to anybody at any level so that you can read it and understand what's going on. If there are kegs involved, so that's item number 2, set up the kegs as number 1 because we want to have time to let the keg rest. What I mean by that is this is essentially a refrigerator. That's all it's good for. It's pressurized so that way it pushes beer out of the refrigerator and into your glass. That's the only purpose it has. It needs to be plugged in first. So there is a cord that gets plugged in. When you plug this in, you're going to hear a little humming sound just like a refrigerator anywhere else that you have. Okay, when we store it, we leave the tap open. So you're pulling it towards you. That way air can dry out the line into the kegerator. If you leave it closed, any moisture that's in there is now just sitting in there. You want to dry it out, okay? So first things first, push your tap shut, because if you put your keg in and it's still open, you're going to get wet, okay? This top piece can come apart, and you can change it based on what's being served. There are extra tap handles in your bar till. So I've got Busch Light, I've got Bud Light, or I've got just your standard, if it's something that we don't have a tap handle for, they go right here. Excuse me. So we're going to close that up. First things first, we need to know what is being served, how many is being served, what the process with that. A lot of times people will order multiple kegs and ask us to check in with them before we serve extras. So the first one's free, and we got to go check with the mother of the groom before we put the second one or the third or the fourth in there. Make sure you're paying attention to that because they want to have control over their beverages. It's a big ticket item that they have to pay for now if it's tapped. When you go in the cooler, you're going to find the kegs that have a plastic seal on the top, and this plastic is going to cover right around. There's a top where the tap goes for it, right across the top. If it's covered with that plastic seal, it means it's a new keg, and that's the one that you're going to use. If the seal is off, it's a keg that we've already served. So especially when we get into the summertime, you're going to notice that we're going to have maybe a leftover keg from an event. We'll hold on to those and try to use them before their expiration date, but if they're paying for a keg, they always get a fresh, brand new keg. So we'll bring that out here. There are dollies, which are basically a cylinder on wheels. You're going to set your keg onto that cylinder, roll it nice and gently out here, and bring it to your kegerator. Now the reason we need to let it rest is everything inside of it is jostling it around as it comes out here, and it's going to go in here. We want to let it settle so that there's not an extra unexpected amount of pressure inside of your keg throwing off your pours. Okay? So we've closed it, we've plugged it in, we've brought the keg out here. Next step, we have 2 pieces inside of our keg. Okay, this is going to be the tap. This is our CO2 tank. We're going to make sure that our tank is closed. Okay, so that says on the top here, close. You turn it all the way to that side. The next step is to push this down and turn it. So there are going to be grooves that line up right here on the top of your keg, okay? Push it down and turn it. If you see how there's a little piece up top here, if this is down, let's see if I can get it, holding it this way. If this is pushed down and you put your keg on, the pressure inside the keg will shoot beer back at you, okay? So you always want to make sure it's released and up. When you push it down, twist it into place. Now that it's locked on your keg, that's when we pull the handle out and lock it down, and now it's allowing whatever is inside the keg to be pressurized and sent up to our tap here, okay? So those are our steps so far. Next step that we're looking at is we're going to open our CO2 tank, and I'm not actually going to physically do this for you tonight because we don't have a keg to connect it to, but you're going to take the top dial here and you're going to turn so that way it opens up, okay? These pressure gauges on the side here, it's a little bit bent, but these are going to dictate how much pressure is going into your keg. Can anybody tell me what our pressure should be?
10 to 12.
10 to 12 psi is what we're looking for, okay? So when we turn it open, everything is connected. This little dial here that says psi is going to shoot up, and we're going to look for that 10 to 12 range. Now, first things first, and I believe, let me double check so I don't give you the wrong information. There is a sheet that talks about safety with the keg, okay? This C portion here, get to the right here, is your regulator for the pressure, okay? So this regulator needs to be turned, allowing the gas to travel. Hear that? Should have a little pressure left in it from last time. Okay. We didn't close it last time. All right, we are closed. Now, if you turn this down, okay, so the way you can remember it, if it's turned horizontal, it's stopping the flow because it's stopping anything from going down into the tube. If it's going the direction of your airway, it's allowing stuff to go through. So first things first, this is closed, you're not going to have a good result because you're not actually letting your CO2 into your tank, okay? Second thing, as it pushes it up, okay, you're going to use this little dial to adjust your pressure. Now, unless something happens where it gets bumped, this shouldn't have to be changed, okay? This should stay the same time after time after time, okay? So you could use this to gently turn left or right to increase or decrease the pressure. The only way that this is going to give you an accurate reading is if you have a keg attached, you have your CO2 turned on, and you have this vertical, so that way it's pressurizing the keg. Because this is going to show you basically how much force is being shoved into the keg while it's still there. Then you can adjust it to hit the dial where you want it, and then you open your tap to actually serve, okay? Let me put this back up so the person doesn't get splashed the next time they use it. The next things to consider, okay, we put our big keg in first. We're going to set our CO2 tank in next to it. It should be able to sneak right along the side here. If you haven't been told this before, CO2 is pressurized gas. It has a little caution signal on it, okay? I'm not saying be afraid of it, but be mindful that it's something that's got to be taken with respect. If you drop this and the head breaks off of it, the pressure inside of it is enough to blow down a wall of a building, okay? There's enough in there to cause an explosion and potentially hurt you. So this is not something to screw around with. It's not something that we set on top of the kegerator. It's not something that we bang around while we're rolling it out. Usually what I suggest is while you're rolling it, you're holding onto it, or you can even hold your CO2 and maneuver your kegerator to where it needs to go. I've never had an incident where it got dropped really violently, but I don't want to see you guys be the first ones to get hurt with it either, okay? So the big keg's inside, our CO2 is in there and controlled where it needs to be. Let it rest, okay? Give it 15-20 minutes to settle because all that pressure building up is going to give you an inaccurate reading for the first little bit anyway. So come back in about 15 minutes. We use our 16-ounce glasses, the big ones, for our keg pours. Okay, if you do not pull your handle all the way to you, basically what you're doing is trying to force a lot of pressure through a little hole. Have you ever tried to blow bubbles? Okay, you're forcing a lot of pressure through a little hole with liquid and it creates bubbles, okay? That's what we're thinking here. We want to create the biggest opening possible so it can flow straight through versus creating resistance along the way. So you crank your tap open. We're going to pour into the side of our glass so it hits the side and rolls down versus bouncing off the bottom of the cup. That's going to create more foam. Open it up, gently tip your cup as it starts to fill, close your tap, take it away, you've got a fresh beer poured. Now after letting it rest, if this is still too foamy or too flat, you're going to be adjusting your CO2 down here. Give it a few seconds, adjust it, and get it set up. I have someone scheduled to come in and clean our kegs. They'll set them where they need to be, so you shouldn't really have to mess with them, but make sure that you're testing it and getting it where you're comfortable with, okay? The more we dink around with the tank, the more likely you're gonna have problems going forward because it's gonna get further and further from the range that you want it to be. The tank itself, eventually, it's gonna have the life of about 3 kegs is all it's gonna have in there. If you tap on it, a low sound is full, a high pitch tink is a light sound, it's gonna be empty. If you notice that it's not pouring out well and you tap on it, you just have to replace it. You can use this guy. Actually, I prefer to use what are they called? The bigger version of pliers. Anyways, there is a pliers that basically opens a little bit further and you can clasp onto this. You have to loosen the nut here, pull your gauge off, replace your tank, and then tighten it up. First thing you do is crank it open. If you hear any hissing, you're leaking CO2, so you have to tighten it up. Now, I've had it before. I have some really strong men here in this group, guys. If you tighten it too much and we can't get it off, we are stuck, okay? So we don't want to strip the nut by having to use something so forceful to get it off that eventually we have no surface to grip onto. Tighten it up so you don't hear any hissing, but don't tighten it so far that we can never get it off again. Realistically, I can loosen this with my hands right now, okay? We should be able to tighten it with your hands too. So, question?
Oh, no.
Oh, you're just moving to fly. Okay. Anybody got a question about kegs?
So one of the things that likes to tell you the pressure,
Mhm.
we were trying to turn the little knob
Yep.
to know
Let's
to
go on
change.
the other one and look at it.
Yeah, and we would turn the nut all the way and but it was stripped,
Okay.
so we weren't able to. I don't know. We spent quite a bit of time on that.
Yeah.
Didn't really
Yeah.
Let me
figure
take
it
a
out. We
look
ended
at
up
it
just
with you.
The reason why we're doing that is because we couldn't see where the gauge was, because the gauge was broken when we froze it.
So we ended up just changing the tanks, and then it ended up working, but
Okay.
it was just coming out super foamy because we couldn't change. Yeah.
When they come, I've asked them to check the dials and actually get that replaced for you, so
Okay.
hopefully that should help.
Yeah.
But realistically, this one is a knob, and I think the other one isn't a knob. I think the other one's a little bit different. You can look at it, but right back here. But again, if you don't have this pointing down,
No, so what we were
That
trying
part.
to do was this, and this is it. So we were trying to turn this because this was stuck, and then this you keep tightening it, it's the threads are gone, so it just keeps turning.
okay, so we can't
this
get
just needs
this
to,
piece.
yeah, we couldn't turn
We couldn't even adjust.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We couldn't move the bolt at all. We got the screwdrivers and everything out, and see you can kind of tell.
Pretty strict here.
Yeah.
Totally straight.
Okay,
And,
let me see if I can get something to crank on that a little bit and get that replaced. But it looks like the gauge is intact. It's just a matter of getting this to be adjusted again.
Yeah. So I just threw on another one of these, and it ended up being okay,
Okay.
but
That
yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
but we weren't
We
able to
managed
adjust.
it.
Yeah.
That
And
makes
it,
a lot more sense because I was reading through your notes and I was like, okay, so we can't adjust it, but everything as far as the dial looks
Yeah.
fine. So
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
It just needs to be
Yeah.
fixed. Okay.
and it was weird, it would be fine for a while, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden you'd have 3 in a row that were just, the whole thing was foam. So it was
We'll
kind
look
of
at that a
frustrating.
little bit more.
Yeah. So.
I'm
And that was the one that they were early and we weren't ready.
Yeah, you guys were a little bit frantic. Weren't you?
Yikes.